Good afternoon. Welcome to the tea table. I am so happy you have joined me today. And I encourage you, if you don't have your tea yet, you can push pause and get your tea, and I'll be waiting for you here. Well, I am so happy you have joined me. Today, we want to go to a very special country. I have a dear friend who I had lunch with this week, and she brought me a gift. And she asked me if I would do a Jerusalem, Middle East tea talk. Because do you know what she brought me? Let me show you. This is matzah bread. And you probably know about matzah bread and made in Israel, but it is dipped in chocolate. And oh my goodness, I've never heard of such a thing. Here is what it looks like. There are 4 very large pieces, and it is absolutely delicious. Too good. That's why you need tea, so you don't eat too much of it. And I will show you how I served it. I found this wonderful little tea device someone invented years ago. It's a little vintage piece, and then you break it like that, and it's in pieces. And then this tea device, I will show you what it does. It folds all up. I put some Swedish Norwegian pepperkaka cookies on the arms, but these arms go right up, so this entire thing can be carried and is so thin for storage. It could be a nice travel tea device, or we all seem to need more space these days. It's an easy one to store. And you may keep your eye out for one. I have another friend who admired mine, and she went to a little antique shop and found one. So we need to inspire each other and have in our homes things that bring us joy and that we can bring comfort and joy to others. Now, my tea cart today that I'm sitting at is my actual tea cart. And that's why I'm sitting on the side. And it is hard for me to show you the whole thing, but it has 2 side tables that lift up and wheels that roll, so I could take this cart into the living room like they do in England, and you serve tea, and then you can have things underneath. It has 2 shelves, and someday I'll figure out how to use this camera better, and I can show you the whole thing. But this is the top, and I have a little lamp, and this is a fun vase I wanted to show you with, these are roses from my garden, and they smell so wonderful. Part of them are the Queen Elizabeth rose. One in the middle is the candy cane rose, and I don't know what the red one is, but this vase is a Russian vase, and it says made in Russia. It's got rose appliques on it, and it holds these roses so nicely. Well, okay, let's start. This is what we're using for a teapot today, and I thought, this looks Middle Eastern to me. You know, the Middle East is a combination of so many countries because you have the Arabic incredible strong influence, and they love tea, but the tea originally came from China. And then when finally it came to Arabia, they started bringing it up. And let's pour out. I have a little cup that matches this pot. And they call these the onion pot. And I think that is why so many Russian teapots and things look in this onion shape, much of that really comes from other influence. It comes from the Eastern Orthodox, but it also comes from the Middle East. Because if you look at the Arabic tea sets, they're always very onion, and then they have the little, this is a little cup, and this is not a big teacup. This is what you would have in the Middle East for real authentic Middle Eastern tea. And I'm going to try this now. This is not Tetley today. Oh my goodness. This is Queen Elizabeth black tea. But you see, England was one of the last places the tea got. It didn't get to England till the 1600s. And that came through a Portuguese queen that loved tea. And she was very beautiful. And she was an inspiration, and everybody wanted to be like her. So they started drinking tea. Well, tea was very expensive. So the leftover tea from the pot, they poured water over the second time, and that went to the aristocrats that were around that were not quite royal, but were courtiers in the throne, and they would use that for their tea. Well, then that was thrown out. So then the third time around, they poured the water over it. It would go to the common people, and they loved tea. So then, of course, when you have this exploration of the, during the time of Queen Elizabeth the First, and you have Sir Walter Raleigh going around the world, and they are being able to find this wonderful tea. And China. And then they create a whole British way. Each country has tea ceremonies. The Asian tea ceremonies are very different than the Arabic has a tea ceremony. And then you have now in Israel today, you have the Jewish people having their form of tea ceremony. And then, of course, it went on the spice road up, up, up. And then, you have the Silk Road, which going up. And that's why Russia has so much tea. And they have these samovars, and they're all shaped in that shape. There's a lot to study on it, and it takes time. It's fun, and you can learn something every time. I've read a lot about it, but every time I read something, I learn something new. Well, what works out so perfect for this little Jerusalem tea time we're having is, I told you a couple of tea times ago that I was going to show you this is that inn that was in Nottingham called On the Way to Jerusalem Pub. Well, it has the date on it, 1189. Now this is the outside, but when you go inside, and you could look this up online, the Old Jerusalem Pub. It's the oldest pub in England. And when you go on the inside, you go back, and there's many rooms, and it's caves. It's sandstone caves that are under the Robin Hood Castle. And I was reading about it again today. There's much more to it. I mean, there's story after story about this pub. And what is known is that Richard the Lionheart and his men, on the way to Jerusalem to do their crusade, stayed there. And that's what gave it the name. Before that, it was called the Pilgrim Pub. Or they didn't call it that. It was a public house. It was the only place you would be able to get food, or when you had a carriage, get your horses, or you were riding a horse, get the horses fed and watered. It was the Middle Ages hotel. And there weren't very many of them. And this one is the oldest they know of. And many people believe that Chaucer, who wrote, the Canterbury Tales, really he's considered the father of English literature. He's so old and goes back so far, 1300s. They believe that Chaucer had in mind this inn or was maybe at this inn. It's not known for sure, when he was writing All on the Way to Canterbury, the same way on the way to Jerusalem, people, their destination. And then he describes all the people and who they are. And that's our first real insight into English life of that time. Thank God he wrote that book, because it opens up the whole world. And that's what I want to talk about today, actually, is Middle East, the Holy Land, and a very special book, because this is something, I want to tell you something that I have found very inspirational. And that is a man named John Keto. He's a true Victorian. He's born early 1800s. He only lives to be 50 years of age. He dies around 1857. And 100 years ago, everyone knew his name. Everyone read his books. And this is one volume. It's called Keto's Daily Bible Illustrations. And you can see how big it is. It's huge. This is volume 1. This is just going Genesis through Esther. The next volume goes Esther through the book of Revelation. So he does the entire Bible. But what is so unique is this man, his story is so phenomenal. He was born into a home that was very poor. His father was a stonemason and he was a drunkard. He couldn't take care of John and the family. And John had to go to the workhouse. Now, if you know anything about Charles Dickens, you know how terrible the workhouse was. We're talking 12 to 14-hour days, little children working in the most dangerous situations. You know, something like perhaps David Copperfield or Hard Times. Any of these books by Charles Dickens, you'll get a picture of the workhouse, because he was so upset about it. He was writing books to awaken the population of England to what was going on. Many didn't know. So he was part of that. And then I think around the age of 10, he fell off a building, hit his head, and went totally deaf. And he was deaf his whole life. Now, his life seemed hopeless. He was 4'8", very small. But there was a family, a Christian family, that met him and found him to be in such an interesting, somehow he was able to communicate, though deaf. They took him in and taught him how to read, and he started reading books. And they gave him more and more. Well, he really was a genius, and he was a great artist. And he started reading and studying. And I don't know how this happened, but you can read this. You can look him up, John Keto, Kitto. He then became the tutor to the children of this wealthy man. And this wealthy man was going to the Middle East. We're talking about 1850. We're talking about no trains, no cars, no buses, no planes. We're basically talking about donkeys, horses, and a caravan. And it's a long, long story. He went from England all the way to Baghdad, all through the Middle East. And he had this brilliant mind he could take in. And he painted and etched the most incredible pictures. In fact, if any of you have old Bibles in your home from that era, or you have any kind of old Bible Middle Eastern art, it's probably John Keto. He was the first. And his things were published in England. People couldn't wait to read it. They were finding out. It was like there was no TV. There were no movies. They don't have any pictures of him. So at his time, there weren't really cameras. They were just coming in. And in this book are all through are etches by him. And some of them are quite small, because in other books, they're large. But he did this. He would etch things like this, but they were full page etchings. And it would be like illustrating the Bible, like Moses in the bulrushes, Moses giving the law, Daniel in the lion's den, Adam and Eve in the garden. And then he would be at these places, and the Middle East at that time was basically unchanged from biblical times. People were still dressing in robes and on the desert. And then his writing was so colorful, and Spurgeon, the great 19th century prince of preachers, who people consider to be one of the greatest preachers in the history of Christendom, his tribute to John Keto is, "This book reads more interesting than any novel. I cannot put it down. And theologically, it is sound as a rock." Now, this book, the reason I know about it is because when my husband was in seminary, he had a professor, Dr. Alban Fogelquist. He was a Greek professor who actually spoke 40 languages, or knew 40 languages, and was a very brilliant mind. And he loved John Keto. Alban was very pontificating, and he would say, "I'm living about 1848. He liked that period, and he would read Keto every day. Well, it's daily Bible illustrations. It's fascinating. And I was looking at it again today. I thought, how could someone read all of this, let alone write all of this? There's no typewriters. The art that he did and the paintings he did and the etchings he did, they were made into woodcuts back in England. And then that's how they stamped them in the book in his era. This wasn't the only book he wrote. He wrote other books. And he has such a beautiful spirit. There's a quote from him, and I'm really paraphrasing because I can't quote it verbatim. But he said, basically, if you're born on the bottom and you're still on the bottom, look up. God has a plan for you. In other words, don't let life take you out. The lemons that we get in life, and he had real lemons. He had lemons like not very many people I've ever heard of. Then basically make lemonade. God has a plan. God can use this difficulty and turn it into something good. And John Keto was considered by all theologians, like I say, 100 years ago, everyone had his books on their shelves. If you can find one, I would get one. I would read it. It's not hard to read. It's wonderful. And it lifts you up. He's very, very creative in his writing, very intelligent. And he makes Bible commentary and archaeology very fascinating. It said also in one article I read that he was really one of the greatest, his writings became one of the greatest defenses of the Bible. And he had a beautiful saying, I'll try to get it for next time, about the sadness of an agnostic to be cheated out of knowing the God of the universe, the God who loves us. He understood the value of taking time to know the Lord. Well, I would also like to say that you can look for the book. Don't give up. Sometimes you find books in different places. You know, a lot of these church libraries are sadly getting rid of their books. And anything by John Keto is a jewel. So I challenge any of you to see if you can find them for your collection. I think really, if you sum it up, a good cup of tea, a good book, beautiful flowers, a nice lamp, and good friends. Really, everyone can have those things. They're beyond the value of gold. They are the true jewels. And each of us can take time and find what we have already in our own homes to enjoy. That's what I encourage you to do today. Find and value the things that God has given you, not just the objects, but the gifts. If He's given you a passion and a love for something, it's for a reason. Do what you can with it to give something bright and beautiful to others. Thank you for joining me today. I pray you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you next time.